Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the First Priest of Sigarda, Sigardian Emissary. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see who won last week's poll and what commanders from Crimson Vow you'll be voting for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Sigardian Emissary is a 2/2 human cleric that costs 3, a green and a white with the following abilities. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Sigardian Emissary. Other humans you control get +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. Right out of the gate, we can see that Kyler is sporting a pretty hefty CMC and stats that are well below what his cost should usually get us, but upon inspecting his abilities we can quickly see that while those stats certainly start off small, Kyler is capable of quickly accumulating +1/+1 counters, and quite possibly being one of the best human lords anyone can ask for. Breaking down his first ability, it simply makes our commander larger and larger for every human that comes into play while he's around. And this ability isn't limited to humans we cast either, as our commander only cares about humans entering play. So normal casting human creatures, creating human tokens, flickering humans, etc. all proc our commander and quickly grow him to a formidable size. Which then leads nicely to his second ability, which turns all those accumulated +1/+1 counters into an equivalent-sized anthem for humans, creating a loop in which the more humans we bring into play, the bigger our commander will grow and in turn pump those same humans even more. And considering how quickly Kyler can accumulate counters on himself in a human tribal build, he'll easily be able to pump human boards by +5/+5 or higher, turning even the lowliest 1/1 human token into a colossal dreadmaw or even bigger by just existing. So as you may have guessed, since Kyler is a human-centric commander, this build will be a human tribal one, with particular emphasis on getting human tokens into play and generating +1/+1 counters. Focusing on human token generation will enable our commander to grow that much faster as we spawn them, both due to the fact that one-shot token creation effects will usually create multiple tokens simultaneously for a huge stat boost for Kyler and then the board, as well as many passive human token generators being humans themselves, generating us a more steady growth as they come into play and then spawn more humans. Then our counter generation will enable us to grow our creatures even bigger, usually alongside our commander as well for even more of a stat boost to our human army, with each additional token placed on our commander empowering them even further. And of course, we'll be running a decent number of payoffs for both humans and +1/+1 counters to ensure that we get even more value as we play and generate them respectively. But to ensure that our board state keeps growing, we'll need to protect it from being disrupted by our opponent's removal effects and wipes, so we'll be running plenty of ways to keep our commander safe from removal, as well as ways to protect our board as a whole to make it as resilient as possible against those wipes, ensuring we don't have to grow our commander back from scratch if our opponents attempt to remove him, or have to rebuild our board after wipes. The issue, however, is that we need to keep our mana open to cast these protection spells, meaning we can't afford to tap out every turn for things like draw. So in an effort to mitigate this, most of our draw will be coming from clues, enabling us to keep our mana open for our protection spells, and using that mana to crack our clues in the event that we don't need to protect our board, which also works nicely with some of our human payoffs to generate us even more value. And finally, while our humans are perfectly capable of holding their own, some divine assistance is always appreciated, so we'll be running a handful of angels that support our human-centric playstyle to provide additional protection and utility for our human troops. So let us stand alongside our fellow human brethren against the horrors of Innistrad's now endless night. With the First Priest of Sigarda leading them, they'll confront that darkness with steel in their hands and resolve in their hearts until a new dawn rises once more. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Starting in the CMC 1 slot, we have its trio of entrants with Avacyn's Pilgrim, Contortionist Troop, and Mikaeus the Lunarch. Avacyn's Pilgrim is a 1/1 we can tap for a white, making it a tribal mana dork to get us some early ramp that later benefits from our human synergies and payoffs. Contortionist Troop is a 0/0 creature that comes into play with X +1/+1 counters and, on our end step, puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature if we control 3+ creatures with different powers, giving us a decently scalable threat that we can then use to generate even more counters for itself or our other creatures. Mikaeus is another 0/0 creature that comes into play with X +1/+1 counters, which we can either tap to put a +1/+1 counter on him, or instead tap and remove a +1/+1 counter from him to put a +1/+1 counter on all other creatures we control, providing us with another scalable threat that can grow itself and provide our board with excellent AoE counter distribution over time. The first half of the CMC 2 slot then brings us some Selesnyan entries with Steward of Valoran, Arcus Acolyte, and Catilda Dawnheart Prime. Steward of Valoran is a 2/2 with Vigilance that we can tap for a green, giving us another tribal mana dork to ramp us nicely in the early game that also has Vigilance to make it a good defensive body once it's pumped by our commander. Arcus Acolyte is another 2/2, this one with Reach, Lifelink, and Outlast for a green or white that gives all our other creatures without a +1/+1 counter Outlast for a green or white. Its host of keywords giving us some solid defense against flyers with some additional life gain, while its Outlast and Outlast aura allow it to grow itself or get that initial +1/+1 counter on our creatures if we have the mana and time to spare. Catilda is a 1/1 with protection from werewolves that allows us to tap our humans to have them generate a mana of their respective color, and also lets us pay for a green, a white, and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, effectively turning all our humans into mana dorks for a substantial amount of ramp, and giving us a mana sink to pump that extra mana into to distribute additional counters. Then the latter half of this lot brings us some white entrants with Thalia's Lieutenant, Hanawar Militia Captain, and Knight of the White Orchid. Thalia's Lieutenant is a 1/1 who, when it ETBs, puts a +1/+1 counter on each human we control, and, when another human ETBs under our control, puts a +1/+1 counter on itself, making it a good source of counter distribution initially that then becomes an ever-growing threat as more and more humans hit the board. Hanawar Militia Captain is a 2/2 that, if we control 4+ creatures on our upkeep, transforms into Westvale Cult Leader, a star whose power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures we control and creates a 1/1 human token on our end step, easily transforming thanks to our large creature base and token generation to produce even more tokens and grow bigger as it does so. Knight of the White Orchid is a 2/2 with First Strike that, when it ETBs, puts a Plains from our deck into play if an opponent controls more lands than we do, letting us fetch up even non-basic Plains untapped if we're behind on our land drops, and its First Strike making it a decent threat once it gets pumped by our commander or counters. Now entering the CMC3 slot, we start off with some green entrants, those being Heronblade Elite, Tireless Tracker, and Champion of Lamholt. Heronblade Elite is a 1/1 with Vigilance that gains a +1/+1 counter whenever another human ETBs under our control, and we can tap for mana of any one color equal to its power, starting off small but quickly ramping up to be a potent mana dork and sizable creature once more of our humans and our commander come into play, while also providing some solid defense thanks to its Vigilance. Tireless Tracker is a 3/2 that, whenever we play a land, lets us investigate and, whenever we sack a clue, gains a +1/+1 counter, providing us with a steady stream of potential card draw as we make our land drops per turn and even pumping itself as we use them as a bonus. Champion of Lamholt is a 1/1 that gains a +1/+1 counter whenever a creature ETBs under our control and prevents creatures with power less than it from blocking our creatures, giving us yet another ever-growing threat, this one with the ability to make our entire board effectively unblockable as it grows. Then we have more green entrants joining us with Tuskguard Captain, Wild Beastmaster, and Eternal Witness. Tuskguard Captain is a 2/3 with Outlast for a green that grants all our creatures with a +1/+1 counter trample, making it a potent counter payoff by allowing our pumped up creatures to punch through blockers with ease. Wild Beastmaster is a 1/1 that, whenever it attacks, has all other creatures we control gain +X/+X until end of turn, X being equal to its power, effectively doubling our commander's Anthem effect whenever we swing in with it for an insane boost of power to our entire board. Eternal Witness is a 2/1 that, when it ETBs, returns target card from our grave back to hand, giving us a means to recur our more potent spells and creatures back from our grave to be used again, while also being a human and proccing our commander and payoffs in the process. Reaching the halfway point of this slot, we have some white entrants up next with Abzan Falconeer, Devout Chaplain, and Cathar Commando. Abzan Falconeer is a 2/3 with Outlast for a white that grants all creatures we control with a +1/+1 counter flying, giving us another counter payoff, this one making our creatures evasive to go over blockers instead of going through them. Devout Chaplain is a 2/2 that we can tap along with 2 other humans to exile target artifact or enchantment, giving us a repeatable back or removal tool and a way to get maximum value out of our humans that just came into play since they won't be able to attack. Cathar Commando is a 3/1 with Flash that we can pay 1 and sack to destroy target artifact or enchantment, serving as both another human and a back row removal tool as needed. Then we close out this lot with Thraben Doomsayer and Adeline Resplendent Cathar. Thraben Doomsayer is a 2/2 we can tap to create a 1/1 human token and, if our life is 5 or less, gives all other creatures we control +2/+2, serving as a steady stream of token production and another Anthem effect in case our life totals drop to critical levels. Adeline is a star 4 whose power is equal to the number of creatures we control and, whenever we attack, creates a tapped and attacking 1/1 human token attacking each of our opponents or a planeswalker they control, making her an exceptional source of human token production to grow our commander by 3 on every attack we make, and getting even bigger alongside our commander's Anthem as our board grows. Reaching the CMC4 slot, we have some card advantage entrants with Briarbridge Patrol, Drum Hunter, and Lenore Autumn Sovereign. Briarbridge Patrol is a 3/3 that, whenever it deals damage to 1 or more creatures, investigates, and, if we sack 3 or more clues, lets us put a creature from our hand into play for free, putting our opponents in an awkward spot when pumped by our commander by either forcing them to take the damage or blocking and letting us generate clues, which we can then use to cheat even more humans into play at flash speed. Drum Hunter is a 2/2 we can tap for 1, and if we control a creature with 5+ power, draws us a card on our end step, giving us a ramp source initially that can then provide us with card advantage as our commander and other creatures grow bigger as they accumulate +1/+1 counters. Lenore is a 0/4 that, at the start of our combat phase, puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control and then draws us a card if we control 3+ creatures with different powers, serving as both an additional counter distribution source to grow our creatures and a card advantage source with a relatively easy to meet requirement, considering how many varied powered creatures we have and tokens that we produce. Then we have a trio of legendary entrants joining us with Audric Lunarch Marshal, Audric Master Tactician, and a Trin Champion of Freedom. Our first Audric is a 3/3 who, at the beginning of combat, gives all our creatures we control any one of 13 keywords so long as we control one creature with said keyword, enabling us to get board-wide potent keywords like Flying, Trample, Vigilance, and First Strike with very little setup, making our wide board states even more effective. Our second Audric is a 3/4 with First Strike who, when he and at least 3 other creatures attack, lets us choose what creatures can block and how they block, effectively granting our entire board unblockable when he swings in or forcing our opponents to block with problematic utility creatures to remove them. Trin is a 3/3 that creates a 1/1 human token on our end phase if we attack that turn, serving as another steady human token producer, which we can easily meet the requirements for thanks to our attack-heavy playstyle. Our last trio of humans in this slot then join us with Abzan Battle Priest, Slippery Bogbonder, and a Timeless Witness. Abzan Battle Priest is a 3/2 with Outlast for a white that grants all creatures with a +1/+1 counter we control lifelink, enabling us to gain huge amounts of life back whenever we swing in with our empowered creatures that works nicely alongside our various sources of counter distribution. Slippery Bogbonder is a 3/3 with Hexproof and Flash that, when it ETBs, puts a Hexproof counter on target creature, and then lets us move any number of counters from our creatures to that creature, providing us with not only a flash speed way to protect our commander from targeted removal, but also a way to consolidate all our counters onto him for an even bigger Anthem effect. Timeless Witness is a 2/1 with Eternalize for 5 and double green that, when it ETBs, returns target card from our grave back to our hand, giving us another Eternal Witness-like effect to get resources back from the bin and being able to be used again from the grave thanks to Eternalize. We then close out this slot with our first 2 non-human entrants, those being Shalai Voice of Plenty and Sigarda Champion of Light. Shalai is a 3/4 flying angel that grants us and all other creatures we control hexproof, and also lets us pay 4 and double green to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, providing us and our entire board, apart from itself, with blanket protection from targeted removal, while also serving as a mana sink to distribute counters with. Sigarda is a 4/4 flying angel with trample that gives all humans we control +1/+1, and, whenever she attacks and we control 3+ creatures with different power, lets us look at the top 5 cards of our deck and put a human from among them into our hand while sending the rest to the bottom of the deck in a random order, providing us with another lord for our humans and letting us dig deeper into our deck for even more humans as she swings in. Moving on to the CMC 5 slot, we have some more human entrants joining us with Victory's Envoy, Juniper Order Ranger, and Maja Bredegard Protector. Victory's Envoy is a 3/3 who, on our upkeep, puts a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control, serving as a decent source of counter distribution and effectively pumping our board by +2/+2 every turn when working alongside our commander. Juniper Order Ranger is a 2/4 that, whenever a creature ETBs under our control, gives that creature and itself a +1/+1 counter, giving us another good source of counter distribution that can go tall as our board goes wide. Maja is a 2/3 that, whenever a land ETBs under our control, creates a 1/1 human token and also gives all other creatures we control +1/+1, making her another token generator that takes advantage of our green land ramp to get even more creatures into play while also being a good lord herself. Then we close out this slot with Sigarda Heron's Grace, a 4/5 flying angel that grants all humans we control hexproof, and lets us pay 2 and exile a card from our grave to create a 1/1 human token, providing us yet another AoE source of targeted removal protection, in addition to turning our used spells into even more humans for additional board presence and synergy. Nearly at the end now, the CMC 6 slot brings us our last human with Moorland Rescuer, a 4/4 that, when it dies, returns any number of creatures with power X or less from our graveyard back into play, with X being equal to its power, exiling itself when it does so, giving us a good deterrent against wipes that can bring back a good chunk of our creatures when it dies if powered up by counters and our commander. Finally, reaching the CMC 7 slot, we have our last creature with Angel of Glory's Rise, a 4/6 flying angel that, when it ETBs, exiles all zombies and returns all humans from our grave back onto the battlefield, giving us a potent top end to immediately rebuild our board state if we have suffered significant losses, while also serving as an occasional silver bullet against any zombie builds we may be facing. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we have some removal options joining us with Valorous Stance, Wilt, and Sundering Growth. Valorous Stance either destroys a creature with toughness 4 or greater, or grants target creature indestructible until end of turn, making it a flexible card that either deals with big creatures or keeps our commander alive through removal. Wilt and Sundering Growth both destroy target artifact or enchantment, the former having cycling for 2 to be cantripped away if we need the draw, while the latter populates to get us extra human tokens for more board presence, both serving as decent backer removal with upside. Then we close out this slot with Wrap and Vigor, which regenerates all our creatures, giving us a very cheap way to protect our entire board from destruction-based wipes and removal for extra resilience. The CMC 3 slot then gives us additional ways to protect our board with Unbreakable Formation, Inspiring Call, Make a Stand, and Rootborn Defenses, all of which are capable of making our board indestructible until end of turn, the first also granting our board a +1/+1 counter and Vigilance if used in our main phase to be used offensively, the second only granting indestructible to creatures with a +1/+1 counter on them but also drawing us a card for each for extra card advantage, the third pumping our creatures by +1/+0 for better trades on both offense and defense, and the last populating to generate some additional human tokens, all of which make our established boards very hard to crack. Switching from defense to offense, some removal options join us with Krosan Grip, Beast Within, and Generous Gift. Krosan Grip destroys target artifact or enchantment and has split second, making it a very effective backer removal tool that's nearly impossible for our opponents to respond to. Beast Within and Generous Gift both destroy a permanent and give its controller a 3/3 to replace it, both serving as excellent removal tools to deal with a variety of threats with only minimal downside. Then we close out this slot with Call the Coppercoat, which lets us create a human 1/1 token equal to the amount of creatures target opponent controls, and we can strive for 1 and a white to select an additional opponent, giving us a way to flood the board with tokens and empower our commander even if our opponents only have modest board states, all on their turns for even less of a window for them to react to it. Reaching the CMC 4 slot, we come to our last 2 instants with Ruinous Intrusion and Semester's End. Ruinous Intrusion lets us exile an artifact or enchantment, then put X +1/+1 counters on target creature we control, X being equal to the exiled card's CMC, making it a decent exile-based removal effect for back row that gets us extra +1/+1 counters on our commander to empower our board even further. Semester's End exiles any number of creatures or planeswalkers we control, then returns them to play on our next end step with an additional +1/+1 or loyalty counter, giving us another way to protect our board which, while not protecting our tokens, at least provides our non-tokens with extra power when they return. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping straight to the CMC2 slot, we have some ramp options with Rampant Growth and Farseek, both of which put a land from our deck into play tapped, the former being limited to basics while the latter can fetch any land with a non-forest basic land type, both serving as staple green land ramp sources that helps grow our mana base nicely. The CMC3 slot then gives us yet more ramp with Cultivate and Kodama's Reach, both letting us search our deck for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into our hand, both getting us additional lands into play and into our hands to make sure we make our land drops later. Skipping to the CMC5 slot, we have some token generators with Visions of Glory and Increasing Devotion, both of which create 1/1 human tokens and have flashback, the former creating 1 for each creature we control and having a flashback cost of 8 and double white, which is reduced by the CMC of our commander, and the latter spawning 5 tokens, or 10 instead if flashed back, and having a flashback cost of 7 and double white, making them both slow but potent sources of human token generation that we can get value of twice throughout the course of the game. Finally, reaching the CMC6 slot, we have our last sorcery with Austere Command, which has us choose 2 of the following effects: destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with CMC 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with CMC 4 or greater, providing us with a very flexible wipe that we can tailor to deal maximum damage to our opponents while dealing minimal damage to ourselves. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Skipping straight to the CMC3 slot, we have some card advantage sources with First Iroan Games, Thorough Investigation, and Uvenvald Mysteries. First Iroan Games is a saga whose first chapter creates a 1/1 human, its second chapter puts 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature we control, its third chapter draws us 2 cards if we control a creature with 4+ power, and its final chapter produces a gold token. Its token production, counter distribution, card draw, and ramp all benefiting our game plan. Thorough Investigation lets us investigate whenever we attack, and when we sack a clue, lets us venture into the dungeon, giving us potential card draw every time we swing in, and then lets us get extra value from the dungeon whenever we crack those clues or from any other clues we create. Uvenvald Mysteries investigates whenever a non-token creature we control dies, and creates a 1/1 human token whenever we sack a clue, netting us some potential value as our creatures get picked off, then generates us additional board presence as we crack those clues for even more human generation. Moving on to the CMC4 slot, we have its only entrant with Search the Premises, which investigates whenever a creature attacks us or a planeswalker we control, giving us more clue generation when we get attacked, usually from evasive creatures that wouldn't be able to get past our front line otherwise. Finally, the CMC5 slot brings us our last enchantment with Cathar's Crusade, which, whenever a creature ETBs under our control, puts a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control, granting us an insane amount of AoE counter generation for our entire board and allowing our commander to grow twice as fast as we put more humans into play. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Our only artifact joins us in the CMC 5 slot, that being Tamio's Journal, which investigates on our upkeep and lets us tap it and sack 3 clues to search our deck for any card and puts it into our hand, giving us yet another source of clues and a way to turn them from card draw into a good tutor effect while synergizing with our other clue generators and payoffs. That covers our artifact, and since we have no Planeswalkers in this build, let's move straight to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Grass Prairie, which we can pay 1 and tap to generate both our colors, Canopy Vista, which comes into play tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands and counts as both a forest and a plains, Overgrown Farmland, which comes into play tapped unless we control 2 or more other lands and taps for either of our colors, Fortified Village, which comes into play tapped unless we reveal a plains or forest and taps for either of our colors, Path of Ancestry, which comes into play tapped, taps for any color in our commander's color identity, and scries 1 if we use that mana to pay for a creature with a matching type to our commander. Blighted Woodland, which taps for colorless, and we can pay 3, a green, tap it and sack it to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped. And finally, Myriad Landscape and Croson Verge, both of which come into play tapped, tap for a colorless, and we can pay 2, tap them and sack them to put 2 lands from our deck into play tapped, the former being limited to 2 basic lands of the same type, while the latter gets a plains and a forest, including non-basics. For utility lands, we start off with Gavany Township, Ghost Quarter, and Tyrite Sanctum. Gavany Township taps for a colorless and lets us pay 2, a green, a white, and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, serving as a good source of AoE counter distribution that we can use on our opponent's turns in the event we have open mana. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, letting its owner replace it with a basic from their deck, making it a good way to snipe out problematic utility lands. Tyrite Sanctum also taps for colorless, and we can either pay 2 and tap it to add the god subtype to target legendary creature and give them a +1/+1 counter, or pay 4, tap it and sack it to give target god an indestructible counter, allowing us to grow our commander with more counters and eventually making them indestructible via a token, which makes them that much harder for our opponents to interact with. Finally, we close out our utility lands with Castle Ardenvale, which comes into play tapped unless we control a plains, taps for a white, and we can pay 2, double white and tap it to create a 1/1 human token, giving us another source of token production that, while expensive, gives us something to do with our mana in the event we didn't use it to protect our board. Lastly, we're running 11 plains and 11 forests as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 38 creatures including the commander, 14 instants, 7 sorceries, 5 enchantments, 1 artifact, 0 planeswalkers, and 35 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 34 humans, 8 cards that care about humans, 23 cards that generate +1/+1 counters for themselves or others, 5 cards that care about +1/+1 counters, 14 cards that produce human tokens, and 12 cards that protect either individual creatures or our entire board, giving us a large number of humans and sources that create human tokens to empower and be empowered by our commander, as well as plenty of ways to generate counters to make them even bigger, alongside payoffs for both to generate even more value, and ending with a decent number of protection sources to keep our commander and board in one piece as we grow it. For general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe, being a bit lighter on wipes due to being more focused on keeping our board intact rather than destroying our opponents, while our other stats remain within normal parameters. Looking at our mana curve, we have 3 1-drops, 13 2-drops, 23 3-drops, 14 4-drops, 9 5-drops, 2 6-drops, and 1 7-drop, leaving us with a mid-weight curve that lets us get our ramp and token generators ahead of our commander to start growing him when he hits the board, which we can then sit on and continue to grow as we keep our board intact with our protection spells. Currently, this deck is valued at $65.14, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, more human production sources such as Rally for the Throne, Join the Dance, and Reverend Hoplite can get us even more bodies on board to grow our commander that much faster, while Pledge of Unity, Collective Effort, and Luminarch Aspirant all generate us more counters for us to grow our creatures with and provide us additional bodies or utility as a bonus. Also looking at the latest set, Crimson Vow, Laid to Rest, Cloaked Cadet, Sigardian Paladin, and Torrent's Fist of the Angels are all likely going to be budget entries once the price settles, that will warrant consideration for the spectacular human tribal support and counter support they provide. For upgrades, Heroic Intervention, Flawless Maneuver, and Teferi's Protection all provide spectacular board-wide protection to make our human armies even more resilient. Mungara the Diplomat, Pure Imaginative Rascal, and Esper Sentinel are all excellent human specimens to give us additional card advantage ramp and counter generation. And from Crimson Vow, Glorious Sunrise, Cemetery Protector, Savior of Allenbach, and Avaburk Caretaker will all make powerful additions to give us additional flexibility, token creation, and protection. Finally, the Great Henge and Rick's Steadfast Leader both make excellent upgrades, the former doing pretty much everything with its card draw, counter generation, ramp, and life gain, and the latter being a tribal lord that distributes keywords to all our humans, making them both spectacular additions, provided you can justify explaining how you spent nearly $100 on a tree with a hole in it, and on a British man playing an American who isn't even on the show anymore. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. As we discussed in the last video, Tovolar Dire Overlord will be closing out our Midnight Hunt builds, and with the prices of Crimson Vow hopefully stabilizing thanks to the pre-release, we should be able to get accurate pricing for the included Crimson Vow werewolves, so look forward to him leading his Dire Strain pack next week. Moving on to this week's poll, with Midnight Hunt closing out, we'll have a fresh batch of entrants from Crimson Vow to choose from, and as suggested by you in the comments, our first poll will be featuring Runo Stormkirk, Eruth Tormented Prophet, and Gralnock the Omnivore. Please cast your votes in the Community tab, link in the description, and let me know in the comments who you voted for and what commanders from Crimson Vow you'd like to see in a future poll. Before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And speaking of which, I'd like to thank Pablo Castillo for his generous donation. Thanks for the coffee, Pablo, and thanks for supporting the channel. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above to see all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.